I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and this is episode 7, titled Roman Conquest of Hispania. In this episode, you will learn that the Roman conquest of the Iberian Peninsula was a long and brutal process involving several rebellions and wars against the indigenous Hispanian people over 2 centuries. Roman interests in Hispania. In episode 6, we saw the Romans win the Second Punic War, making Rome the most powerful state in the Mediterranean. However, conquering the Iberian Peninsula took Rome 2 centuries, from their landing at Ampurias in 218 BC to the end of the Cantabrian Wars in 19 BC. Why did it take so long? Well, for starters, Rome didn't even control the entire Italian peninsula when the Second Punic War began. In the south, Greek colonies and Italic cities betrayed Rome when the city showed weakness during the war, and in the north, the Gauls were suspicious of the Romans. Next, consider the size of the Iberian Peninsula. It may not look like it at first glance, but it's twice the size of Italy. Additionally, the Roman Senate had no clear plan for Hispania other than extracting resources. Rome also lacked soldiers to conquer Hispania because they often had multiple wars to fight. Lastly, the Iberian Peninsula was very diverse and not politically unified, making the Roman conquest of Hispania more difficult and less profitable than others. The same happened with the Spanish conquests in the Americas. The Aztec and Inca empires were conquered quickly because they were centralized states. But conquering regions without any political unity, like Chile or northern Mexico, proved much more challenging. Given these circumstances, why was Rome interested in the Iberian Peninsula? The truth is that the Roman Republic showed no special interest in Hispania before the Second Punic War. They did make alliances with city-states like the Greek colony of Ampurias and the mixed settlement of Sagunto. But the Romans did not actively seek these alliances. These cities asked for Roman help because they feared Carthage. Therefore, Rome only became interested in Hispania because Carthage used it as a base to attack Rome. With Hispania in Roman hands, Rome deprived Carthage of a crucial base for recruiting troops and extracting natural resources. The Carthaginians stopped being a threat once the Romans occupied parts of Hispania. But the Romans then realized that the Iberian Peninsula could be exploited for both strategic and economic reasons, especially for its mineral wealth and the capture and sale of Hispanian slaves. We should also consider that many Roman aristocrats used their personal military successes in Hispania to enrich themselves and pursue greater political ambitions in Rome. The Iberian Revolt. To better manage the newly conquered territory, Scipio divided Hispania into 2 provinces, Hispania Citerior and Hispania Alterior, which later had their capitals in Tarragona and Córdoba, respectively. During the Roman Republic, provinces were territories outside Italy governed by officials chosen by the Roman Senate. This means that Hispania was not yet considered an integral part of the Roman Republic, and there was little administration or law in place. The Romans were only concerned about securing the occupation of the Hispanian provinces and extracting resources through tributes and authoritarian, predatory, and terror-based policies, without any plan to develop Hispania or care about its people. The first 60 years of Roman rule in Hispania were especially violent, starting with Cato's suppression of the Iberian Revolt and ending with the fall of Numantia. Rome initially relied on agreements with the natives and a strong military presence to keep parts of Hispania under Roman control. However, this approach soon showed its weaknesses. Due to a new war in Greece, Rome decided to reduce its legions in Hispania from 4 to 2. Greece was a much more attractive region at that time, but reducing the military presence in Hispania proved to be a big mistake for the Romans. The first praetors or governors in Hispania were replaced every year and lacked the experience and interest to understand the locals. This led to abuses of power, and soon the Iberians, Turdetani, and many Phoenicians rose up against the exploitation and the Romans' BS, since they had presented themselves as liberators who would leave once the Carthaginian threat was neutralized, but instead decided to be the new occupiers. In 197 BC, the peoples of the two Hispanian provinces rebelled simultaneously against their new rulers. The uprising was widespread, and with about 10,000 Roman soldiers to face it, the praetor of Hispania Citerior was killed, and his army was crushed. Things were looking bad for the Romans. But the following year they won the war against Macedonia, which allowed the Senate to focus on what was going on in the west. The experienced Cato the Elder was sent to Hispania in 195 BC to handle the situation with an iron fist. Cato the Elder, a traditionalist who opposed foreign influences on Roman culture, represented the new landowning class that ruthlessly exploited their estates with slave labor, a practice that would cause huge social problems down the road. Cato was the first in his family to become consul, and because of that he spent a lot of money on promoting himself and exaggerating his achievements. Cato believed that the war should pay for itself, an unwritten rule followed by many other Roman generals later. This is why they looted and destroyed villages without mercy when needed. The situation in Hispania was critical, so the Senate assembled a large army of over 50,000 men to suppress the revolt. Cato entered the Iberian Peninsula through the allied Greek colonies of Rosas and Empurias, and there he achieved a great victory over the coalition of Iberians. As a result, some Iberians in present-day Catalonia surrendered, handed over their weapons and hostages, freed Roman prisoners, and had to allow the Romans to dismantle many of their fortifications. Then the governors of Hispania Ulterior urgently requested Cato's help. He used diplomacy to persuade Celtiberian mercenaries not to assist the Turdetani in the revolt. The Romans managed to pacify the Iberian peoples, but Cato still had time to send his army through the unexplored Celtiberian territory to show Rome's power and gather information about the area. A new revolt began in Catalonia, but he quickly put it down before returning to Rome. There, Cato the Elder was celebrated with a triumphal march for ending the Iberian Revolt and bringing home the largest amount of gold and silver ever seen in Rome, as well as many slaves. Cato is praised in Roman history, and it's not surprising, as his methods were later used by Roman imperialism to conquer new territories and brutally suppress any resistance. First Celtiberian War. You might remember from episode 5, Pre-Roman peoples of the Iberian Peninsula, that the natives of western and inland Hispania were poor and had very unequal societies, which encouraged banditry. This was a problem the Romans faced shortly after their initial conquest, with constant attacks on the Guadalquivir and Ebro valleys from some native groups like the Lusitanians. Between 194 and 179 BC, the Roman legion specified the conquered territories and made incursions into the Meseta or Inner Plateau and the Celtiberians' homeland. During this time, Rome captured Toledo and advanced north along the Ebro Valley, making direct contact for the first time with the Vascons of Navarre, the ancient Basques. Over time, the warlike Celtiberians gathered an army of 35,000 men to oppose Roman expansion, leading to the brief First Celtiberian War. Although the Celtiberians gathered a large army, it was not enough to stop Rome, and they were repeatedly defeated. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus the Elder ended the war by signing a series of treaties and adopting a more conciliatory approach than Cato the Elder's, for instance. He established relationships of patronage and clientele with the Celtiberians and founded a city in the province of La Rioja. Gracchus was the first to regulate tax collection to prevent abuses, required allied Celtiberians to provide auxiliary troops, and prohibited them from establishing new cities. The Senate often opposed peaceful policies like those of Gracchus, demanding relentless warfare and the unconditional surrender of the Hispanians. Rome was still organized as a city-state, and most expansionist actions were driven by the political and economic ambitions of Roman aristocrats with military authority over provinces. These figures ruled the territory in an authoritarian manner, allowing them to abuse the local population, which, unsurprisingly, led to revolts. This continuous unrest in the Iberian Peninsula concerned the Senate, but in the same Senate, praetors had friends and family protecting them. It wasn't just the governors who abused the locals. Patricians and equestrians also exploited them. Patricians were the elite class who based their power on land ownership, while equestrians, or knights, based their power on trade and tax collection. Fortunately for the Romans, the natives were very politically divided and exhausted after years of constant wars. So most revolts against Roman power and abuses did not threaten Roman rule. After years of wars, it was time to stop expanding and focus on exploiting the two provinces of Hispania. Things were relatively quiet for the next 20 years, and during this time of relative peace, more natives began adopting the agrarian and urbanized lifestyle of the Romans. The Romanization of the Iberian Peninsula was underway, meaning the adoption of Roman cultural elements by the natives. And the presence of Roman soldiers and the arrival of settlers from Italy only accelerated the process. Second Celtiberian War. Peace did not last long though. In 154 BC, the Second Celtiberian War began when the city of Segeda, in the province of Zaragoza, grew and decided to expand its walls. Rome saw that as a breach of the treaty agreed with Gracchus the Elder, although it is unclear whether the treaty forbade expanding existing walls. In any case, Rome feared a widespread rebellion in Hispania because the Lusitanians and Betones had allied to devastate the region of Turdetania, in western Andalusia. To prevent this, Rome launched a two-front war. Initially, things went poorly for Rome, as the Lusitanian coalition defeated the Romans in Hispania Ulterior, and the Celtiberians repelled the Romans in the first siege of Numantia. The praetor of Hispania Superior tried to end the war by promising to return to the terms of the previous treaty. The Celtiberians agreed, but the Roman Senate refused, as the proud Roman oligarchy wanted the total submission of the natives. Rome showed that it knew no way to resolve problems other than through violence. However, praetors and soldiers were not eager to be sent to Hispania, as the land was known for being full of dangers. A new consul was sent to continue the war and decided to attack nearby native peoples who had never caused trouble for Rome. This is why Roman history labels his war as illegal and driven by greed for fame and fortune. Despite that, he was never held accountable for his actions. Lusitanian War. While things in Celtiberia calmed down, the Lusitanians and Betones continued to pose problems. Lusitania was a wild region like Celtiberia and had even greater issues due to its continuous raiding campaigns launched by the Lusitanians against nearby territories. The Lusitanian War turned very bloody when Governor Servius Sulpicius Galba, after being defeated, promised the Lusitanians peace and land to solve the issue of poor distribution of agricultural lands. With their hopes up, the Lusitanians agreed to meet with Galba, but the scoundrel betrayed them, ordered them to lay down their weapons, and surrounded and massacred the Lusitanians. Few survived this treacherous attack, but one of the survivors was Viriathus, who likely was among the Lusitanian elite. In 147 BC, the Lusitanians attacked again, but were defeated and sought peace once more. As the treaty was about to be sealed, Viriathus reportedly spoke to his people, reminding them that the word of a Roman held no value. The Lusitanians saw him as the leader they needed and chose him as their chieftain. Viriathus then waged a long and effective guerrilla war against Rome. He managed to control much of southern and central Hispania, making his struggle go beyond the Lusitanian cause. Viriathus' success was such that he cornered an army led by one of the Roman consuls and forced him to accept Lusitania's independence and recognize Viriathus as a friend of the Roman people. What a chat! When a new consul took over, this humiliating treaty for Rome was broken, and the Romans continued the brutal Lusitanian War. By 140 BC, the Lusitanians were exhausted and tried to make peace with the Romans. The consul accepted, but the Senate did not. Thus, the war continued, and the following year, the Roman consul bribed 3 of Viriathus' men to kill him while he slept. This act was considered shameful by the Senate, but the Lusitanian War ended shortly after the assassination. Along with the Numantine War, the pacification of Lusitania was a major step in the Roman conquest of Hispania, allowing Rome to advance into the land of the Galeci in a campaign to explore new lands. In 136 BC, Rome achieved a great victory over the Galeci, although present-day Galicia was not fully conquered until Julius Caesar's time. Numantine War. Let's go back to 143 BC. That year, Viriathus' resistance was at its peak, and the Celtiberians decided to join the fight and rebel. This marked the beginning of the Third Celtiberian War, better known as the Numantine War. A general who was victorious in Greece was sent to Hispania with an army of 32,000 men. On paper, a large army led by a competent leader like him should have quickly defeated the Celtiberians. However, the war in Hispania was very different from that in Greece. In Greece, the consul fought against centralized states, but in Hispania, the indigenous peoples were divided. This meant that there would be no decisive battles, only a series of skirmishes and smaller battles that would turn the conflict into a true war of attrition. The consul attacked the region of the Bacchae, the pre-Roman people settled in the central area of the Douro Valley, to cut off the supply lines and military aid to the Celtiberians. His successor attacked Numantia, the most important Celtiberian city, with about 10,000 inhabitants, a population that will be the second largest in the sparsely populated province of Soria today. Numantia was strategically located on a hill to control the nearby region and a crossing of the Douro or Duero River. After the Romans were repelled at Numantia, they tried to take the second most important city of the region, Termantia, but they also failed. Once again, the new and incompetent praetor had the idea of diverting the river to starve the city, but the Romans were attacked by the Numantines while attempting this. The situation was dire, with the cold winter approaching and many Roman and Italic soldiers contracting dysentery. Moreover, the governor's annual mandate was nearing its end, so he decided to make peace with the Numantines. When his replacement arrived, he denied having made peace without the Senate's consent, so hostilities resumed. The poor Numantines must have been perplexed by this, another example of how treacherous the Romans were. The next 2 years were quieter, Roman attacks on Numantia failed, so Rome once again attacked the Bacchae. Attacking these peaceful people became a bad habit when attacking Numantia proved too difficult. In 137 BC, Consul Gaius Hostilius Mancinus took charge, and his leadership was a complete disaster. He lost multiple battles against the Numantines and then received false rumors that the Cantabri and Bacchae were coming to help the Numantines. So, how did Mancinus react? By doing what military strategy 101 teaches you not to do: panic. He ordered a retreat and the Roman army ended up surrounded by the Numantines. Fortunately for the Romans, the Numantines were too noble and naive, and offered peace when it was the perfect moment to destroy them. All treaties signed by the Romans had to acknowledge their supremacy, but in this one, the Numantines placed themselves on the same level as the Romans. To put this in perspective, a city of 10,000 inhabitants and fewer than 4,000 warriors, considered themselves equal to the great city of Rome. What audacity and insolence the Numantines had, thought the Romans. This was unacceptable, and the Senate could not recognize such a humiliating treaty, despite the unhappiness and exhaustion people felt in Italy. The Senate ordered the new consul to deliver the coward Mancinus to the Numantines, completely naked and with his hands tied behind his back. The Numantines were shocked and refused to let him in, so Mancinus returned to Rome and lost his citizenship. The next 3 consuls did not attack Numantia for fear of suffering the same fate as Mancinus, and they again attacked the surrounding areas without much success. The Roman army was completely demoralized at this time, and the Roman public viewed it as a humiliation that a random Hispanian city could stand up to almighty Rome. So the Republic needed a competent man to finish the campaign once and for all. The man chosen for this mission was Scipio Aemilianus, an adoptive relative of the war hero Scipio Africanus. Scipio Aemilianus had already commanded the Roman army in the Third Punic War and destroyed Carthage, and he had also participated in campaigns in Celtiberia, so he was pretty much the only possible choice in 134 BC. However, the Senate viewed him with suspicion due to his growing popularity and the social problems in Rome, making it harder to recruit. So he had only 4,000 volunteers as reinforcements for the troops stationed in Hispania. Nevertheless, many prominent names voluntarily joined him. Gaius Marius, who would become a very important consul, the future king of Numidia Jugurtha, the Greek historian Polybius, and the satirical writer Gaius Lucilius. He had a powerful army of 60,000 men, only a third of whom were Italic legionaries. The rest were mostly native Hispanian auxiliaries. The first thing Scipio did was restore discipline by applying very strict austerity rules and rigorous exercises. Once the army's morale was lifted, the Romans attacked the Bacchae again, and then built a circuit of fortifications to completely surround Numantia. The walls were 3 meters high and more than 2 meters wide. While building them, the Numantines, of course, attacked, but the Romans repelled their attacks thanks to an ingenious system of rapid communications. Additionally, Scipio Aemilianus ordered the closure of the Durus tributaries. All these actions had a single goal: to starve the Numantines. A brave warrior named Retogenes managed to slip away and seek help from nearby peoples, but all the important towns refused out of fear. Only one chiefdom offered to help, but the elders warned Scipio, and he ordered the amputation of the hands of the young men of that town. Yes, the Romans were that brutal, yet they are often glorified as civilizers. After years of constant attacks and months of siege, as expected, Numantia was starving and finally accepted unconditional surrender. However, most of the Numantines and refugees in Numantia had already died of starvation and disease, or decided to commit suicide, refusing to be enslaved like the few who did not die. This can be seen as an act of patriotism or desperation to avoid enslavement, but it could also be explained by the devotio, that social institution in which warriors swore to protect their leader for some special perks, but if the leader died, the warriors had to kill themselves. In any case, the heroic last stand of Numantia inspired future generations of Romans and Spaniards, and even Miguel de Cervantes, author of Don Quixote, wrote a play about the siege. The destruction of Numantia in 133 BC, along with the victory over the Lusitanians, was the turning point in the Roman conquest of Hispania. Now that all the main centers of resistance were pacified, only the few peoples of northern Hispania could offer resistance. Social tensions in the Roman Republic. During the next 50 years, Hispania enjoyed relative peace. However, there were still some rebellions by the Celtiberians and Lusitanians. The most serious consequence was the massacre of 20,000 Celtiberians and the destruction of the city of Termantia. Poor economic conditions and unequal distribution of land prompted these groups to rebel, and they sometimes killed indigenous elites who had made deals with the Romans and benefited from land grants. The Romans often promised land distributions that were traps to kill rebels or were insufficient to help the population. The Romans did not want to revolutionize society, so their response was only brute force to deal with these revolts without solving the underlying social and economic problems. The brutality of the Roman conquest had wreaked havoc on the economy of Hispania through deaths, migrations, looting, property destruction, and the enslavement of the indigenous population. It was only after the fall of Numantia, during a more peaceful period, that Hispania's transformation into a Roman territory accelerated, and the negative effects of the Roman conquest's predatory methods gradually lessened. The only notable conquest during this period was that of the Balearic Islands in 123 BC, using the pretext of fighting pirates. This conquest secured the important maritime route between Denia, in the Valencian region, and the Balearics, provided more agricultural land for Italic settlers, and made it easier to recruit the renowned Balearic slingers. Meanwhile, the Roman Republic faced many social problems and other wars, such as the Servile Wars, the social war between Rome and the Italic cities, and the Cimbrian War against the Germanic peoples. Therefore, social tensions in the Roman Republic increased after the Numantine War. As wars happened farther from Italy and became more frequent, the model of landowning peasants who served as soldiers for the Roman legions was in crisis. The biggest beneficiaries of Roman imperialism had been the oligarchic landowners who exploited their estates with slave labor. As small landowning peasants couldn't compete with this model of economic exploitation. Many were forced to sell their land at low prices and move to Rome in search of other opportunities, but most ended up in worse living conditions or unemployed. In summary, the Roman Republic's conquests throughout the Mediterranean did not improve the life of the average Roman and Italic. It made it worse, something more common than people realize while talking about empires on the rise. Within the Roman aristocracy, two factions emerged. The optimates, who defended the interests of the oligarchy through the Senate, and the populares, who were also aristocrats but sought personal power with promises of reforms for the common people. Two policies of the populares from this period are worth noting. First, the military reforms by Consul Gaius Marius. Marius changed the requirement to be a landowning citizen with a minimum amount of wealth to join the Roman legions, allowing poorer citizens to enlist. This reform was long overdue to solve the recruitment problems of an expanding political entity. However, it was not without problems. Allowing poor people to join the army meant they were more interested in a military career. This change allowed generals to gain loyalty from soldiers by being generous with the spoils of war. This loyalty was to the generals, not to the Roman state, which was key to transforming the Republic into an empire. The process of Romanization also sped up, as lands were given to retired soldiers to form colonies in places like Hispania. The other notable policy of the populares was giving grain to the common people. Hispania played a prominent role in this policy as Rome's granary alongside Sicily, and provided a constant flow of slaves to the agrarian and slave-based economy of the Republic. The Republic's crisis allowed an optimate like Sulla to march on Rome and become a dictator in the modern sense of the word, long before Julius Caesar. Political tensions and repression reached an unprecedented scale, causing many political leaders to exile themselves to Hispania. And why Hispania? While the Iberian Peninsula is relatively close to Italy, some parts were already very Romanized, and the provinces had enough population to form an army, if necessary, to face Sulla. Sertorian War. During Sulla's rule, the most notable exile of the Populares faction was Quintus Sertorius. In 83 BC, Sertorius had been appointed praetor of Hispania Citerior, but when Sulla took power in Rome, he replaced Sertorius, who then became a rebel. Sertorius fled to Mauretania, now Morocco, where his victories earned him fame in Hispania, especially among the Lusitanians. This allowed him to return to Hispania and form an army mainly composed of native Hispanians. For Sertorius, Hispania was a means to an end, to remove Sulla from power in Rome. It's important to note this because he was not an anti-Roman separatist, as some Spanish and Portuguese nationalists claimed. Sertorius used guerrilla tactics to defeat larger Roman forces, quickly gaining a reputation for his military skill. He soon became known as the new Hannibal, winning battle after battle and conquering most of Hispania Citerior. He gained the support of Lusitanians, Celtiberians, Iberians, and some Romans who opposed Sulla, solidifying their loyalty through pacts of devotio. Victims of Sulla from the Populares faction and native Hispanians saw supporting Sertorius as their best chance to improve their position within the Roman Republic. In Hispania, Sertorius created a parallel political structure similar to Rome's, challenging the legitimacy of Sulla's government. For example, he established a senate composed of Roman exiles, elected magistrates, and created a school in Huesca, his base of operation in Aragon, to educate the sons of notable indigenous people in the Roman way. Meanwhile, Sulla died, but the Optimates remained in power by adopting some policies of the Populares. The Optimates even passed an amnesty law to provoke defections on Sertorius' side. A young and a skilled Pompey took on the mission to crush Sertorius, but it was not as easy as he initially thought. The Sertorian War became a war of attrition for both sides, but after several years of fighting, Sertorius' followers were more exhausted than their opponents, and a general betrayed and murdered Sertorius in 73 BC. Thus ended a long nightmare for Rome. Civil Wars, from Republic to Roman Empire. Pompey crushed many rebellions and pacified entire provinces of the Roman Republic, including in Hispania. He was a leader who wanted to earn the admiration from both the Republic and the common people to gain political power. But after fighting pirates in the Mediterranean and conquering multiple areas in the Near East, the Senate didn't properly recognize his victories. Pompey was a hero, much like Scipio Africanus or Scipio Aemilianus, and because of this, he was a threat to the Roman political system. The irony is that the opposition of his former supporters in the Senate brought the ambitious Julius Caesar together with Pompey. Thus, the end of the Republic was approaching. Pompey had many important friends, the support of the common people and the army, and strong networks of clientele in Hispania, where he even founded the city of Pamplona, the capital of Navarre. On the other hand, Julius Caesar, appointed praetor of Hispania Ulterior in 62 BC, built a network of loyalties by being generous with his soldiers and forming personal relationships with notable Hispanians, such as the Phoenician family of the Cornelius Balbus from Cadiz. To finance his ambitions to become consul of Rome, Caesar set out to conquer present-day Galicia to seize its rich mineral resources. Julius Caesar, Pompey, and the richest man in Rome formed the so-called First Triumvirate to monopolize power in Rome and divide control of the provinces. During this period, Julius Caesar conquered Gaul, modern-day France. Pompey was worried about Caesar's growing popularity, but he decided to stay in Rome, believing he remained strong in Hispania. This was a huge mistake. There were too many ambitious leaders vying for power, and only one could emerge as the leader of the Republic. Pompey had largely stayed out of the politics of the Populares, so the Roman Senate, dominated by the Optimates, offered the consulate to Pompey in 53 BC. In response to this move, aimed at ending Julius Caesar's political career, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River in Italy with a single legion in the winter of 49 BC, starting a civil war. Pompey and the Senate fled to Greece, planning to attack from the east and from Hispania. However, Caesar marched to Hispania, and Pompey's legions could not coordinate well and were defeated or switched sides. Caesar's decision proved correct, as he marched against an army without a leader before attacking a leader without an army. Caesar's victory greatly benefited Hispania, but I will talk more about that in the next episode of this chronological series, so please subscribe to New History of Spain if you haven't already. After Caesar's famous assassination in 44 BC, Mark Antony, Octavian, and another man formed a new triumvirate. Later, another civil war erupted between Octavian and Mark Antony, but it did not affect Hispania at all, as there was total loyalty to Julius Caesar's adoptive son and heir, Octavian. Octavian won the civil war, founded the Roman Empire in 27 BC by proclaiming himself Augustus, and the rest is history. End of the conquest of Hispania, the Cantabrian Wars. But the Roman conquest of Hispania was not yet complete. The northern part of the Iberian Peninsula still needed to be conquered, and Octavian had big plans for Hispania. Augustus needed to finish the conquest of Iberia because if Julius Caesar could conquer Gaul in less than a decade, he needed to achieve something even greater. You could argue he had already done that by incorporating the rich land of Egypt into the Roman Empire. But completing the conquest of Hispania will end 2 centuries of continuous wars and troubles. Moreover, the Cantabrian mountains were rich in mineral resources, which were essential for the empire's exhausted treasury. Augustus needed to be the one to achieve this goal. The Cantabrian Wars did not start in 26 BC when Emperor Augustus arrived. They had begun at least 3 years earlier with poor results. The Barduli and Caristi, who lived in what's now Basque country and probably spoke Proto-Basque, were likely subdued at this time. The Astures and Cantabri allegedly attacked Hispanian villages under Roman protection, driven by their poverty and lack of good agricultural lands. This gave the Romans a reason to start a campaign of conquest. The Cantabrian Wars were difficult because they took place in mountainous terrain. The locals had the advantage of knowing the land, they used guerrilla tactics, and the lack of agriculture in the northern peninsula made it hard to feed the Roman soldiers. Augustus personally led the campaign in 26 BC with more than 70,000 soldiers. But after nearly being struck by lightning and falling ill, he had to abandon the campaign and settle in Tarragona. This briefly made Tarragona the political center of the Roman Empire, since Augustus and his entourage were there. This greatly benefited the city, and to thank the emperor, it became the first city to erect a temple in his honor, starting the imperial cult. In 24 BC, Augustus considered Hispania pacified and celebrated a triumphal march in Rome to mark the end of the conquest of Hispania. However, that was just propaganda, because he needed to present himself as victorious after personally leading the campaign. The war continued for a few more years. As attacks on the Romans persisted and Augustus grew more frustrated, he sent Agrippa, his favorite general and friend, to end the resistance. Agrippa exterminated many Cantabri males of military age, while the Astures surrendered. He forced the mountain dwellers to settle in the valleys to make them easier to control and prevent new uprisings. The Romans subdued the peoples of the Cantabrian mountains through massacres, enslavement, the burning and destruction of villages, and the mass suicides among the Cantabri. Over this blood-stained and devastated territory, Roman rule was imposed. The conquest of Hispania was completed in 19 BC, and it was time to reorganize Hispania and fully integrate the region into the Roman Empire.
The verdict!
In today's verdict, I want to reflect on the positive image of the Romans in Spain. The idea that the Romans are the pillar of Western civilization and that they civilized Hispania by bringing roads, aqueducts, laws, and countless other things ignores the brutality of the Roman conquest. As I talk in my video on bad history takes about Al-Andalus that you can watch on the show's YouTube channel. The Romans did not arrive with a plan to develop Hispania. During most of the conquest, they focused on extracting resources for the benefit of Rome and the Italics. They didn't give a crap about the Hispanians. They only wanted minerals, cereals, and slaves from Hispania and had no problem causing great massacres and looting to subdue the native Hispanians. Always keep in mind that Roman Hispania was built by spilling the blood of thousands of Hispanians. And with that, the verdict ends. That said, if you like the show and want to enjoy early access to my content or be mentioned in an episode, please go to patreon.com/newhistoryspain and become a Patreon of New History of Spain. If you are tired of having tens of paid subscriptions, you can also support the show by making a one-time donation. Just follow the links in the description. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel or the podcast and join the Discord or turn on the notification bell so you don't miss my new videos. In my next episode, I will talk about the early Roman Empire and the Romanization of Hispania. Thank you for listening and see you soon!